Hello everyone, welcome to the APM PMO SIG webcast. We are going to talk today about project mental health and well-being and how PMOs can address that, turning PMOs into PWOs, into Project Wellbeing Office. So I'll do a quick introduction of myself after my co-presenter Patrick Scott, who's going to tell you all about him and why he's the right man to be talking today. Patrick.
Hello everybody, I hope you're having a good day. I'm Patrick, I'm currently Head of PMO at Young Minds and really pleased to be doing this webinar today because it brings together two of my key passions. So passion for managing projects, programs and portfolios, which I've done in the voluntary and community sector, and I've also got a real interest in mental health and well-being as well. I've worked at a number of charities that focus on that, so Mind, Rethink Mental Illness, and now Young Minds.
Thanks, Patrick. And I'm Mike Belch. I've got about 15 years PMO experience. I became a PMO manager accidentally a number of years ago for a big American computer company, helped them set up and operate a global PMO. I currently work as a consultant for RSM, well, the 6th largest accounting firm in the world, and do consultancy on projects and program management and P3M3 and PMOs. And again, like Patrick, I have a strong interest in mental health in projects and programs, and I'll share a little of my experience during this session. So what we want to talk about today is the problem, which I'll cover, and then I'll hand over midway through to Patrick, who will talk about some of the solutions. The problem, and you can find these statistics everywhere, and they all seem to broadly agree that mental health in the workplace is a problem that has not had the coverage that it should have, but it's a significant problem and something that needs it. In common with many employers, I'm noticing that my own employer, RSM, has started appointing mental health first aiders. It's starting publicising now. I think this is the second year running that they've publicised. I think it was last week, the week before, World Mental Health Awareness Day. But the statistics, are compelling. 1 in 4 people, according to Mind, will experience mental health problems in any given year, and 1 in 7 will be people in the workplace. So it's not just old people who are not working, it's not unemployed people, it's not young people in school, it is people in the workplace. And when you look at mental health sickness, 13% of absence days can be attributed to mental health, and that adds up to £8 billion in lost revenue. In fact, the EU's own research, backed up in the APM research, or cited in the APM research, which I'll cover later, shows that this amounts to something like 4% of GDP. It's a staggering amount. What's really scary, though, is the concept of presenteeism. So absenteeism, we all understand. We are not physically in the workplace, we're not working, we're off sick. And with physical conditions, people are much more likely to take time off work than they are with mental health conditions. So what happens is presenteeism is much more of a problem. And presenteeism is where you are in the office, toughing it out, braving it out, being the big man or whatever. I can fight through this cold, I can fight through this headache, that's fine, but I can fight through this mental health condition, or I really don't want to talk about this mental health condition. I don't want my employer to know I'm suffering from stress, that I'm depressed, that I'm feeling really bad about myself or other things at the moment. That fighting through, that refusal to acknowledge, not taking time off, not seeking help, can have a disproportionate effect compared with the actual absenteeism where you do take time off. So it's really worth understanding that. So there's a lot happening right now. It's really good that Mind, the mental health charity, the main mental health charity for the UK, are publishing a lot of research. Rethink, as a charity which is supported by a number of employers, with their time to talk. As previously mentioned, the mental health awareness weeks and the appointment of mental health first aiders. There's a lot going on, and I think we're probably now at the start of a wave of change that means maybe 4 or 5 years' time, I don't know what other people think, that in 4 or 5 years' time, we may well be able to all talk openly about, look, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling anxious, and people will listen and people will not judge, and that will not affect our promotion prospects, and people, colleagues and managers will not look at us differently. Okay, I think we're just at the start of that, but it's going to take time, and I think this is why we wanted to bring this up, and we wanted to highlight what the problem is and potentially what the solutions are. Now, what's interesting is the APM has published some research. You can get to this, and I would really encourage you to download this research and read it. If you go to the URL that's there, or if you just want to click through the website, go to APM, go to resources, scroll down the page, go to research, and then on the left menu bar, you'll see the 2019 Wellbeing research. It's also discussed in this quarter's Project magazine, which was published in September. So it was published last month, and I was pleased to be interviewed as part of that article and talk about some of my own mental health issues to do with projects and programs. In fact, let me just cover that quickly before we dive into the research. So a typical example here of not necessarily serious mental health issues, but stress. Okay, stress is part of the whole mental health and well-being area. So stress is caused when demands for your attention exceed your capacity to deliver. Stress in a bridge occurs when the load on the bridge exceeds the capacity of the bridge to carry that load. It's no difference in people. Lots and lots of competing demands. So back in 2006, when I was fairly new in the PMO world and I was helping my then employer set up a PMO office for the whole of the world, looking after 365 concurrent projects in about 38 different countries. That was a very, very busy time for me, and I was flying all over the world, and I was managing a small team. But at the same time, my father was dying of cancer. So with a father who's dying of cancer and all of the stresses that puts on you as an individual, all the demands that puts on you together with a mother who just really couldn't cope with that, and was putting extra demands on me, Mike, I need your help. That combined with being an employee in a job with huge amount of pressure, and all the same time being a husband and being a father to 2 young children, all of that just massively exceeded my ability to cope, and it made me ill. I got really sick. I had a lot of problems, but I fought through it. I tried to be the big man. I didn't call in sick, and my work suffered. My work suffered massively, and I was really lucky that a manager spotted that, recognized that I was stressed, and put me on a stress management course here in the UK that I wouldn't be so grand as to say it saved my life, but it certainly saved my job and saved my career. I certainly wouldn't have been in a job for much longer if she hadn't have done that, and I'm always grateful to that. And I've always remembered that lesson, and throughout my career since, a number of times I've spotted people who are under stress and have helped them. Now that's really important, because if you can nip stress in the bud, stress can often be a precursor to other more serious mental health issues like depression and like serious anxiety. So that's my story. I think what's interesting about this APM research is it shows that the project and program management community, compared with the general workplace population, suffer a disproportionate number of mental health and well-being problems. Now that is quite disturbing, but it's maybe not that surprising. So if you think about projects, you are working in a high pressure, high stakes environment, and you are under constant pressure to deliver against that project management holy trinity of time, cost, and quality. And when you're delivering and it's going right, it feels great. Honestly, I'm sure you'll all know, there's nothing better than the feeling of delivering something on time, of getting a particular deliverable or even a whole project accepted by the end customer. You know, it feels great. But when that gets too much, when everyone just starts piling the pressure on, you start to miss things, you start to miss deadlines, you start to stress about things, and stress means that you start to get anxious, and stress means you start to maybe get argumentative, and stress means that your performance just really suffers. So the in the APM's research, they surveyed 183 people, or they got 183 usable survey responses back, and they compared this against a large benchmark data set of 70,000 people across all professions. And a couple of things that they found in particular were problems with work relationships. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is really bad, the scale of concern, the scale of problem in the area of work relationships was touching 10. It was something like 9.5, and the particular areas of concern in the health and well-being of people in projects and programs were suffering an aggressive management style, lack of support from other people, isolation. So even though you're working in a project team, people felt isolated from others, unclear expectations from management, management always finding them at fault, other people taking credit for their achievements, and poor relationships with colleagues. So this points to people in projects and programs just not feeling they're part of a team, not thinking they're getting the support from their managers, and not really seeing the benefits of working together, which is quite disturbing. And then another area where they score low is the area of job conditions, so actual working conditions. And the three most problematic areas within this were dull and repetitive work. I've never found projects to be dull and repetitive, although if you get your PMO wrong, there can be an awful lot of dull and repetitive work if you're constantly reformatting PowerPoint slides on a weekly reporting basis. Dealing with difficult customers or clients and a lack of enjoyment of the job. And then a third area which scored very badly was then the strain on individuals' psychological health, and this is what led us to really focus on this mental health and well-being area. So people are having difficulty making decisions, losing their sense of humor. It's leading them to avoid contact with other people, suffering from mood swings, and they become unable to listen to other people. And so across all of the areas, and I've only just highlighted the difficult ones, there are some real issues. There are some real issues of which work relationships and job conditions seem to be the most difficult. I would definitely encourage you to pick up this research and read through it, relate it to your own experiences, potentially talk it through with colleagues and see if any of it rings true with yourselves. And when you've then read the recommendations of what might be done wrong, then consider how you could put some of that right in your own organization if you agree with any of the recommendations at all. So just to sort of wrap up me talking about the stresses of project management before I hand over to Patrick, project management is high pressure, the relentless pressure to meet time, cost, and quality. Time stops for nobody. It's really, really hard, and quite often the buck stops with the project team. So it's not just understand, this research wasn't just about stresses for project managers. This is stresses for everyone in the project management team, and a team can fall on just one person not performing, so one person not performing, the whole project can suffer. So that, combined with matrix working is brilliant when it works well, but when you have a line manager who simply doesn't understand the day-to-day pressures of what you're doing on your particular project in your area of the business that you're assigned to at the time, you've got the project manager wanting one set of things from you, you've got your line manager wanting another set of things from you, and that lack of that lack of understanding of the competing demands can be really tough. Demanding timescales, not enough resources can be an issue. I don't know about any of you, but I spent 2 years working for a large telecommunications company, and in both financial years that I was there, mid-financial year, they had a crisis replan of the capital project. So mid-year, we had to go into the bunker for a couple of weeks and replan our projects and find how we could cut 30% of cost out of them or 30% of scope out of them so we could continue to deliver on time, and then go out and tell the teams, look, you've now got to do more with less. It's really, really difficult. It's interesting how these last 2 points, innovation and information overload, manifest themselves. I would never have said that innovation is a bad thing. I'm part of a community, the project data analytics community, and we're always looking at new ways of doing things in the project world. How do we use artificial intelligence to collect project schedule and cost performance information and give better quality reports, but actually that innovation, to some people, not all people, that innovation, that change, that lack of ongoing routine, that can really be disruptive and quite stressful for some people. And then information overload. This is not just information overload within the project, this kind of relentless amount of reporting that gets done week after week or month after month, but we're not just getting overloaded by our information at work. We've got our mobile phones, we've got our iPhones and our Android phones, and we're getting chatter on WhatsApp from the project teams or from friends. We're getting stuff in on LinkedIn where we're forgetting that when we're at home, we need to just turn off and be at home. Because I don't know about you guys, but I'm of the mantra, I work to live rather than live to work. So I work to get that paycheck so that I can spend time with my family and enjoy being with my family. And that's a lot of how I manage my stress, is by not living to work. Work is not the be all and end all of what I do, but I recognize, some people at different points in their career, that can become their way of working, and therefore that constant, always on information overload can be a huge problem. So projects, relentless pressure, lots of competing demands equals lots of stress. And while pressure can be a fantastic thing when we get it right, it can be a huge problem if other things like a sick relative, like financial issues, or like redundancies at work or something, if something else comes along and it's just that little bit too much for you to cope with, that can be the trigger of more serious issues. So at this point, I want to hand over to Patrick. Right now, we've had no questions, by the way, but please, as you're listening, do feel free to post any questions, and at the end of Patrick's segment, we'll be happy to answer them. Patrick.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, and I'd like to echo and build on what you said by, first of all, saying it's a very timely moment to have this webinar. We've had World Mental Health Day on 10th of October recently, and I think the publication of the Wellbeing of Project Professionals research is very interesting, and would definitely encourage you to have a read of that. I think one of the interesting recommendations from the research is that organisations that don't have a PMO should absolutely put one in place for the health of project professionals, and I think that's a great starting point, because PMOs are fundamentally about providing support, guidance and strategy for projects and the people on them. Fantastic at gathering intelligence. They've got a real bird's eye view of the organisation, and so I think are very well placed to spot the early warning signs around poor wellbeing and mental health, and great at connecting the dots between projects, but importantly the people running them. To some extent, I think the research does make quite grim reading, but I think the best way to look at it, thinking positively about it, is really as a call to action for us all to collectively do more. And I think there's definitely solutions out there. And what I want to put forward over the next part of this webinar is basically a 6-part solution. And here's part 1. So first of all, hold a mirror to our own practices. To paraphrase the Gandhi-inspired quote, PMOs should first seek to be the change they want to see in the world, shining a light on their own practices. And I think one of the areas that can absolutely be done is the PMO drumbeat of governance and reporting. Reporting can be weekly, fortnightly, monthly, and it does create pressure on projects to kind of feed the PMO. Sometimes it can turn into a bit of a relentless pressure. And alongside, they've got to juggle kind of ongoing delivery and performance on their projects and programs. Now, I'm not sort of suggesting for a moment that we throw the baby out with the bathwater or the PMO playbook. Clearly governance and reporting is really important, but I do think there's opportunities at times to employ creativity and flexibility to create change, which after all can be as good as the rest. And to give you an example of that, we've got something called the Youth Engagement Programme here. The team basically works to get young people out campaigning on our behalf. And it was a program that had faced a series of challenges, dipping KPIs, missed targets, showing a lot of red, not a great reporting history. Reporting was something they really struggled with. And we just weren't really getting the information from the reporting anyway. So one of the things I did is sat down with the team and said, right, forget the reporting this month, going to take that off your table because you're telling us you're struggling with it and you've got stresses on the project. And then instead, let's sit down, let's have a supportive face-to-face conversation. And by taking that action or disrupting the PMO drumbeat in that instance, I was actually able to kind of elicit much more useful information about the project. We came up with a joint action plan and managed to get it on a much better footing. And once we'd done that, we managed to re-establish the reporting cycle in the future. So it really turned into a win-win in that situation, a win for helping the well-being of the staff on that difficult project where they were struggling with the reporting, but also a win for PMO because I kind of elicited kind of new information. I mean, the other thing I've done around reporting is when it's clear that the organisation and staff are kind of stressed with other big pressures. You know, sometimes I've extended the reporting cycle. We tend to have a fixed cycle that's linked to our, you know, financial year. But, you know, quite recently we had a huge amount of work for all staff to do around launching our new strategy. We're trying to pull it together for launch next year. It's taking up a huge amount of time, and there'd also been some other organisational pressure. So one of the things I did is write out to all projects and say, you know, we recognise the pressures you're facing from around the organisation, and to help you meet those, we're going to push back the PMO reporting cycle by 2 weeks. And that actually created a huge amount of goodwill. It took some of the pressure off, but also I'd say we ended up getting you know, better reports by the end of it. And I think the other opportunity here is to look at creating really effective tools that are effective and efficient for your project managers and project teams to use. So one of the things we've done is look at all our tools, including the reporting and governance tools, listen to feedback. We've kind of streamlined a lot of those tools. We've reduced the size of them. We've made them more efficient. So that has kind of reduced the burden on delivery teams as well, which has been really appreciated. So that's the first part of the solution. You know, don't be afraid to disrupt the drumbeat at times, and, you know, certainly look at your tools, and maybe even like a digital tool or something could save a lot of time as well. That's an area worth looking into. Second part of the solution is build an awareness of mental health and signposts. So whilst PMOs cannot be expected to be experts in all the different mental health and wellbeing conditions, you know, they can build that awareness and signpost onto further sources of support. And we'd argue that at least one member of every PMO, if not everyone who is outward facing into the project community, should become qualified mental health first aiders. That's really good at kind of building that knowledge and awareness. And the other thing is, not all this work needs to be done alone. You know, have you considered organising a talk for your projects on how staff can look after their mental health and well-being? I think doing so shows you're taking an interest in the health of staff and might generate some brownie points in and of itself, whilst it's also a really useful avenue for bringing in external expertise. And I think over time, mental health expertise and wellbeing expertise can be generated so that PMOs become a buzzing hub of information, well placed to signpost and support staff. Third part of the solution is to really examine the intelligence gathering system. So I mentioned at the start, PMOs are fantastic at gathering intelligence, but I think don't just ask what the intelligence tells you about the project. You know, really ask what that intelligence tells you about the people and their well-being. You know, so there's a whole series of warning signs that you might see. So for example, it might be a project constantly rating red. It could be a drop in KPIs. It could be submitting reports late, or even a lengthier report than usual, perhaps reflecting changed project scope and the fact that there's a lot more to report on. And I think you can also look for warning signs in project meetings too. So, for example, individuals that are being atypically irritable or argumentative. And all these signs are, you know, very much highlight that the people need looking at as well as the project. And we were able to do that on one of our big projects. Amplified was showing a number of these warning signs. The staff team were clearly very stressed. It was a project that was always kind of reporting red. There'd been a drop in KPIs. We'd had some missed targets. And what we were able to do is, by spotting those warning signs early, is go in and work with the team of staff and very much frame conversations, not just around the project, but how's all of this affecting you, and kind of what support do you need us to bring in to kind of enhance your well-being. And through that, we were able to go through a staff restructure and bring in a number of additional staff in response to feedback we got from the team. And that very much supported their well-being and put the project back on a good footing. So that's the third one: examine your intelligence gathering systems. Fourth part of the solution is to build a community of support and practice. So I think bringing project managers and their teams together from around the organisation allows them not only to share expertise, but also offload about stressful project work and find solutions to common problems. I think a problem shared is very much a problem halved, or so the adage goes. And when you remove the source of stress by finding a group solution to a difficult project situation, you make the people better too. And this is something we've done at Young Minds. We tend to make them, very informal gatherings with coffee, tea, biscuits and donuts. And that really helps put the staff at ease and where they're in a position to share some of the problems they're working on. And it's made a huge difference here. As one of the project managers said to me after they were set up, before these forums existed, I felt completely isolated. I felt completely alone. And now I've realized that I'm part of a team. I can get help from around the organization, and the problems I'm facing, other projects are facing as well. So I really recommend that. That's the fourth part of the solution: build that community of support and practice. I think the fifth part of the solution is, really walk and talk, visit different areas of the organisation, and play that proactive troubleshooting role, which I think PMOs can play so well. And I think, very much twin these walk and talk rounds with proactive offers to help. This is again something I've done at Young Minds, and by walking around the organisation, I've generated huge amount of PMO work, such as helping on updating risk registers, lots of planning work, chairing a difficult project meeting where they perhaps want somebody who's a bit removed from the project to step in, and sitting down and really creatively problem solving different project problems with staff members. And by kind of taking that work on, that reduces the burden and the stress for project professionals around the organisation. Couple of tips around this. So a couple of questions to ask. The first one is, ask the same question twice. So I think if you kind of ask how somebody's day is going or how they are, often the answer will come back, I'm fine. I think we have a real tendency as humans to do that. Even when it's not fine, we'll say, yep, everything's good. So sometimes just ask that question a second time, but how are you really doing? And that can often elicit a real range of useful responses that can enable the PMO to step in. And then another couple of magic questions to think about when you're doing your walk and talk rounds. So number one, what makes you wake up in the night in a cold sweat? Very good for identifying those kind of sources of stress facing people. And a second one, if you had a magic wand and could change one thing, what would it be? And again, I think the answer to that question is kind of a golden opportunity for PMOs to come in and maybe help provide that one thing, or at least some kind of solution. And as I say, this is something, the walk and talk rounds are something I've done at Young Minds, and it's generated lots of work for the PMO, but it really has kind of improved things for project professionals around the organisation. Part 6 of the solution, last but by no means least, really sit down with project managers and their teams and flip chart the kind of sources of stress that they're facing. I think there's going to be some common ones, and there's also going to be sources of stress that are unique to your organisations. People, situation and events can be a good way to frame a number of reasons for stress. So for example, an event, you might have capital spend time challenges partway through the financial year. company decides to cut back, and project teams have to respond by pulling a rabbit out of the hat so their project continues to deliver despite the reduced time and funding. Or an example from the people category could be an unsympathetic and ineffective sponsor who does not support or protect the project team. And a creative session like this will really highlight valuable information, but then also enables you to take action. So we did this exercise at Young Minds, and a number of the project teams cited the fact that they felt that sponsors in our organisation didn't know enough about the PMO system to offer really effective help and support. And what we were able to do off the back of that is then arrange training, conversations with the sponsors to upskill them in the PMO system, and that led to more effective sponsorship, but it also led to enhanced well-being of project professionals from around the organisation. So that's part 6, mapping out the sources of stress. Couple of closing thoughts then. I would take you back to the Wellbeing of Project Professionals. Do absolutely read that, but perhaps most importantly, reflect on what action you can take to move this area forward. I think ultimately action is everything. I go to these really interesting funding talks across London, run by the organisation Funding, lots of interesting talks put on by lots of interesting speakers. And one of the speakers, somebody called Henry Blanchard, basically had studied lots of successful people from all different fields of life and concluded that the one thing they all had in common was they were all real doers at the end of it. So they were very good at kind of gaining knowledge, but most importantly, they kind of acted on it consistently. And he kind of used the 20-80 principle, where he said basically 20% is knowing how to do something, but 80% of it is actually putting it into practice and doing things and then learning from that. So I think hopefully what this webinar has given you is some new knowledge, some new ways of doing things, some new solutions, and of course you'll have your own thoughts on solutions as well. But I think we've all got a collective challenge now to really, let's put that into practice over the coming months and years. So thank you very much for joining us so far. And we now move on to the really interesting part, which is taking as many questions as we can.
Thanks, Patrick. We have got a few questions in now, which is great. Hopefully Patrick's got the same list of questions that I've got, and I've gone through and tagged a few that we can each answer. So let me go through a couple and then hand over to Patrick, and we'll tag team as we go through. Good question here. Don't you think a lot of project manager stress addiction is down to a macho PM culture, even amongst women PMs? So macho's not the word. I think the bravado or wanting to be the hero, wanting to be Superman with your underpants over your trousers, not wanting to be seen as weak, absolutely right. And that was exactly what happened in my circumstance. I just did not want people to see that I was weak. I did not want people to see that I could not cope with what was happening. And when my manager said to me, look, it's okay to say you're having a problem. It's okay to admit you can't cope. And we'll luckily I was in an organization that then set out to help me. So that was really good. Another question, what do you think the reasons behind an increase in mental health problems are? Is it just a symptom of fast-paced modern life, or better awareness, or something else? I think the better awareness one, that's a really good one. When you're aware that something is an issue, then it becomes more prevalent, and I think that can only be a good thing. But I do think modern life, this always on, the relentless drive of businesses to do more with less, the relentless pace of change in the modern world. Gone are the days when you could join a company as an apprentice draftsman, spend 4 or 5 years as an apprentice, and then spend the next 30 years sat at your drawing desk doing the same job and getting promotions every few years and so on. I don't know about people here, but my first proper job lasted 9 years. My second employer lasted 14 years. But since then, change has been change has been dramatic, and that pace of change just seems to be accelerating all the time. So I think it's the pace of change, and I think it's the increasing amount of information that's being dumped on us. So let me answer another one. Bad mental health, is it a risk or an issue to a project? So how can you go about raising awareness of this or formally reporting it? And the simple answer is, I don't know, but it's a really, really good question. It is definitely a risk. I think we do need to be mindful of how we deal with staffing issues. I can give you one example, and this wasn't mental health preparedness, it was physical health preparedness, but it's maybe a good example of a solution that you could apply. So I'm a mad keen motorcyclist, and on the way to work one morning I smashed into the side of a vehicle that pulled out in front of me, and it took me out of the business for 10 weeks at zero notice. Now, as the manager of that PMO, I had made it my mission to ensure that everybody in my team could do a part of everybody else's job. So collectively, the team had resilience to cope with one person being off. In fact, I was quite shocked when I got back, positively shocked, when I got back to see that they had coped really well without me, to the point where I hadn't actually been missed, because everybody could do what was necessary, and the work that I was doing was absorbed. And maybe that was a sign. In fact, it was a sign that it was time to go find another job, because my work there was done. But it's a really, really good challenge. How should we recognize it as a project risk or issue, and what should we do about it? So something for some future thought. So Patrick, what's the difference, do you think, between projects run in an agile and a waterfall environment? And in fact, a similar question further down is, do you think that agile is actually better? So could running projects in an agile manner with much less of that relentless drumbeat be a better way of doing projects? Agile versus waterfall, discuss.
Yeah, I think my take on kind of agile versus waterfall is it depends very much on the type of projects you're dealing with. So for example, we've just launched a digital project, and initially we were going to do it in a waterfall way, and I thought, because it's constantly changing, because it's very difficult to plan ahead, actually this is much better suited to an agile approach, and that's what we've adopted. But similarly, we've got projects that are better suited for the waterfall method. So I think obviously if you get the method right for the project, that really helps the well-being of staff, and I think there's a lot that the agile methodology can bring to that. So yes, absolutely. But yeah, get the methodology right for the project, and be a bit flexible around it as well. And I think there's been a lot more talk recently of methodologies such as bricolage, which is very much about picking and choosing different approaches to project management and bringing them together depending on what the situation is. So I think there's huge opportunities in that area, and all of this can support, getting the well-being right for project professionals. Very helpful as well as if they buy into the methodology. With the digital project we've done a lot of upskilling around the agile area and really got their buy-in to it as an approach, and that's helped it take off very speedily, and everybody's behind it and has good well-being so far, which is encouraging.
Thanks. A comment here that, is the term drumbeat helpful? Is it not better to talk about rhythm, so business rhythm, or even different types of rhythm, different types of musical styles that work for the project you're on? I love the idea that we can have a reggae project, a hip hop project, a blues project. That'd be cool. So that's a really nice comment. But to you, Patrick, what do you think? Do you think that So one person commented, is it not the case that the project team, the PMO themselves, are the cause of stress to project managers? And what advice do you have on this? And also, to the same end, is what tools would you consider as useful in disrupting that PMO drumbeat? Or maybe the question is about how can you help the drumbeat or the rhythm? Let's use the word rhythm.
Yeah, I really like that term rhythm. I think what I was trying to get at with the drumbeat is, sometimes if it can become very repetitive if you're always doing things in the same way, and pressure is routinely applied, and then if you get a disruption to that rhythm, as it were, where you get additional pressures on top of it for staff members, that's when I think it can be quite difficult. So I think it's good if PMOs can keep their ear closely to the rhythm of projects around the organisation, and certainly be able to change that rhythm when needed. I think in terms of tools available, I mean, some of you might be more advanced than we are at Young Minds. I mean, certainly at the moment, our tools are kind of Word and Excel based. But one of the things we're starting to look at is whether there's a kind of a digital tool that we might use move our PMO system onto. Mike, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that one from your experience, any particular tools that have been helpful?
So when I joined this global telecoms company as a PMO manager, I had 3 of my 10 staff running reporting for 3 days a week. Okay, so we were on a weekly reporting cycle for every single project, regardless of whether it was a £10,000 minor change to the website or a 20 million implementation of Oracle ERP. It didn't matter. Everything was on a relentless weekly reporting cycle. And the reason that the project was the reason there was so much stress in both the PMO world and the project management world was because reporting was so difficult. Everyone was reporting in PowerPoint, or depending, one type of report was in PowerPoint, another type was in Excel, and everyone would type in their information and it would freak out the formatting, and people were late doing it because it was so difficult. So compliance was about 70%, on-time submission was about 50%, and quality was just down the toilet because most times people weren't even changing last week's report because nothing had fundamentally changed. So I took a step back and I had a long look, and what I realized was just sometimes the simplest solution can make the biggest difference. So the one tool that I used was SharePoint. I set up a SharePoint list, and every week on Friday afternoon before leaving for the week, project managers would go in and just update their project status on SharePoint. There were some drop downs for red, amber, greens. There were some commentary, but all of the time they could just pull up last week's report, modify what mattered. And it meant that they could do their report on a web-based form in 5 to 15 minutes once a week, rather than spending 3 or 4 hours wrestling. And it reduced the reliance on my PMO from 3 people for 2 or 3 days a week to 1 person for half a day a week, because we could just extract everything and reformat it perfectly and get the information out in a more timely manner. Quality went up, compliance went up, on time went up. So sometimes the answer, just to recap, the simplest things can have the biggest impact on the way people on the way people manage that business rhythm. So that's quite a long-winded answer, but it had a big effect.
That's great, Mike. And here's another one I can pick up. So what are the behaviours that a project manager needs to exhibit to their team members to really make a difference in stressful situations? they might be experienced, and how do you walk the talk? Well, I think this is definitely an area where PMOs can lead the way. You know, what I try and do mainly in terms of setting a good example to the kind of project leads and managers I'm working with is to really listen to them, you know, to very much frame conversations around, you know, how's the project going, but also how are you doing as individuals, to keep my ears and eyes peeled for those warning signs we talked about. You know, if you're seeing warning signs in situations such as people being irritable in meetings, you know, think what that reveals about well-being. And I think, you know, we do have a long way to go on this. I mean, certainly with, you know, the time I was working at Rethink Mental Illness and Mind, you know, in terms of physical health, we're just not there at getting the same parity of esteem as kind of mental health and wider well-being. I think, you know, I did my back end recently, for example, and, you know, I was mentioning it in every conversation, you know, and pretty much everybody in the organisation has heard me moan about it now. I think when it comes to mental health issues, although there's kind of a lot more awareness now, people are much more guarded. People often don't want to let on. So you really have to kind of watch for those, you know, subtle warning signs sometimes that everything's not okay, and then really take the opportunity to pull individuals aside one-to-one, you know, and maybe mention some of the stuff you've seen and use that as a chance to check in on them. The other thing I do with kind of walking the talk is when I've had good experiences working with the project managers and project leads, is to very much say, in terms of the team members that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis, you know, feel free to use this approach, do similar things as I'm kind of doing in the conversations with you. And that's kind of led to helping us to start really embedding a culture where it's okay to talk about well-being and mental health, and where positive action can be taken as a result.
Thanks, Patrick. Another question here. Once you've mapped out the sources of stress, what are the next steps? Working group, action plan to resolve? Yeah, that's a really good idea. So once you have all those sources, look at the ones that you can have some impact on, and see if you can agree what you can do to manage that. Sometimes though, those sources of stress are very personal. Patrick mentioned people. Okay, my boss is stressing me. Events. I know events. I've got this webinar coming up in 3 days, and I haven't prepared for it. And Patrick has, and I'm going to look like an idiot. You know, that's another type of stress. Or situations like a member of the family, you know, who's being ill. So I think you just have to look at what you can affect, and look at the best approaches for what you can affect, and where that is individual, talk them through with other people. Where it is a group, agree an action plan, document it, and report back. You know, I think a really important thing is to always communicate. So 2 books. I've long been a fan of this book. I bought my first copy in 2006. I have bought multiple copies in teams that I've managed. I've actually just given it out to members of the team. Adrenaline Junkies and Serotonin Seekers is all about managing the chemistry of stress. Fundamentally, stress in a human occurs when you run out of adrenaline and a really nasty chemical called cortisol kicks in, and this is how you boost the production of serotonin, because serotonin boosts the production of adrenaline, and adrenaline mitigates the need for cortisol to kick in and cause all these nasty symptoms. So this is a fantastic book. Interestingly, it's also written in a style that suits people who are stressed. It's in little sound bites. You can dive in, you can read it with your very short stressed attention span. not wanting to make light of the topic there, but it really, really does help. And the second book, the Smoking Nuns book, is, as I refer to it, is by a guy called Tom Stutterford, and it's stress and how to avoid it. And this is a book to read through. So I would say this is not the book to read when you're stressed, but it's certainly, if you're interested in the topic of stress and how stress can lead on to mental health issues, this is a really good book. I'm happy to share for people to take a look.
And just to add to that one, Mike, yeah, I think there's some really valuable information on the websites of kind of organisations such as Mind, Rethink, and Mental Health Foundation. So, you know, do have a look at those. There's some really good guidance around how to spot, you know, mental health conditions and kind of how those mental health conditions can be supported. Yeah. So, would really encourage that route as well.
Fantastic. So listen, we're right on the half hour. We've been running for an hour. We could take these questions for ages, but we've all got jobs to do and stresses that mean we need to get them done, or pressures that mean we need to get them done, shall we say? So we're going to go. Please feel free to connect to myself and Patrick on LinkedIn and ask us any questions. There's also an PMO SIG group on LinkedIn, which I presume a lot of you know about. So carry on the conversation there. Ask us some questions. Come with some of your experiences. Come with some of your solutions. Let's do our bit collectively to make sure that the whole idea of boosting mental health and well-being in projects is an ongoing thing. It's not just something we're talking about once. It's not just a one-off thing, one day a year to pick up on someone else's question that we weren't able to answer. You know, let's keep this ball rolling, and please do go read that research. Yeah, it's really, really insightful. Closing thoughts, Patrick?
Just, I would kind of point you back to the action. Action is everything. So really encourage you to take some time after this, just to write down some notes and maybe plot out some action you can take in your own organisations. And good luck with it. You know, I think collectively we can make a huge difference in this area, and you know, we absolutely have to for the good of our people and our projects.
Good, thank you. That brings this to an end. We look forward to future interaction with you all. Thanks.